Thank you everyone for coming this morning. I know it's early and it's nice outside, at least here in Anchorage. This is the first REA that I've worked on for this. DeWalker has been primarily in charge of the anthropogenic component of the REA. So I've been trying to come up to speed quickly.
Yeah, just click on the presentation and get it.
There we go. Okay. So for this presentation, I'll cover kind of the human footprint, which includes all sorts of anthropogenic activity, communities, like population size, different transportation methods, mining, oil and gas infrastructure, recreation, so like national parks, refuges, renewable energy, and subsistence activities. And these are kind of all driven by the management questions for the Central Yukon. The top two basically deal with looking at the human footprint on the landscape, both anthropogenic and natural, in the past, 20 and 50 years, and in the future, 20 and 50 years. And then the last question deals with subsistence activities, what's being harvested, by whom, and where. And so this is kind of an example of one of these, what did you guys call them? Process models. Just kind of looking at mining, trying to look at the change in mining. So you have like placer mining that occurs at 1 year, and looking at it compared to the prior year, and looking at the change and kind of the direction, the distance of that mining activity. And you combine that with your land status, mining regulations, to kind of look at what land is available for mining, and then try to model potential placer mining sites in the future. So here's the communities we're dealing with. For this map, it not only shows you the land status, primarily federal land in the area, but it kind of gives you an idea of the population sizes. I limited the population size in this to like around 3,000 or less, if we included Fairbanks and some of the communities around there, which is below us. So, wow. I changed some slides, but they're not changed on this one. I hope I have the right presentation. But this is the ecoregion. That gray area, that's, does anyone remember what that was? It's like southern Tanana region. The gray area on the bottom, I forget what it is. What is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But that just kind of gives you an idea of where the communities are, and we decided to group them by watershed. So the Kotzebue Sound region are the communities out to the west, kind of Noatak, Norvik, Selawik, Kobuk, and then you have regions in the interior, the Koyukuk River drainage. Tanana River drainage is down along the south there, along the road, and then kind of in the central you have the Yukon River. We tried looking at rural versus urban. That didn't really work so well because basically you only have Fairbanks as the urban area, and a few other metrics. This one seemed to work the best. And when you look kind of at subsistence harvest, it makes sense. The communities off to the west, there's a lot of caribou harvest. As you, when you go to the Yukon area, you have a lot more fish harvest, salmon, pike, and then down to the south, you have a lot more moose harvest, and kind of as you move to the east. Here's an example of the roads. Yeah, I want to stop and get out my other presentation. Can I do that?
You can. Yeah.
So anyway, on this map, I added some mining trails. They're called, it starts with an R. There are a bunch of trail networks that the DNR gave me that miners usually use to access their mines. But this is typically the linear features that we use, but I think it can be updated with this layer.
The R422s or 244s or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then we talked about trying to digitize maybe some trails around some of the communities. I kind of started on this, but it actually takes quite a bit of time. And when you look at it, you know, the largest area I went out was like 8 miles. So on the scheme of things, it's pretty small. So here are the national parks and some other state recreation areas. I was able to get use information for the national parks, so going back to like 1973, looking at the number of overnight backpackers, the number of visitors, the number of people who just stay at the visitor center, statistics like that. So kind of when I was approaching this, I was thinking that, you know, we can have kind of a intensity use of human intensity. So you could use the total number of people, say, that visit the Koyukuk National Wildlife Refuge and divide it by the total area. That kind of gives you an intensity use. One of the parks, the gates of the Arctic National Park, there it has different entrances and has I think it has a Fairbanks office, and so that park I'm getting divided up more spatially because it would be unfair to put the people who are in Fairbanks all in that area. But the other parks are pretty much just have one central location. Here's the renewable energy. In this, if you cut it down to funded, there's slightly fewer, especially around Fairbanks renewable energy projects. I was able to get the actual database from the Alaska Energy Authority and pare this down to just the funded. But I think I need to talk to them to see about, you know, kind of in the future, because part of this is trying to predict in the future where renewable energy might go. So talk to them and get some ideas about how to do that.
So these are funded, but not necessarily.
And this is just the funded, yeah. And then mining activity. This is kind of looking at lands that could have the potential to have mining activity. This I kind of mentioned before is kind of a scare map, I think, with all the different dots on there. There's really not that much mining activity on the land. I do have a layer where I calculated the mining intensity for that area. So I was looking at placer mines, and since the DNR, you know, didn't want to give away a person-specific placer mine location, what I had him do was calculate the density within a drainage unit. So we have a map of that. And these Ambler mining roads, trying to predict future transportation lines. There's various sources of data for those routes. I was able to get the layer to these different, the road to Nome, the road to Ambler. I was able to get the GIS layer for that instead of trying to digitize from a PDF, which I did, and I was good, except the road to Umiat was way off, so it was wrong. And I mean, with the mining, there's a lot for me to go into and try and figure out what are legitimate mining sites and what aren't. And then we also use these formally used defense sites, so FUDs, so munition response areas and munition response sites. There's not too many in our study location. A lot of them are around the Fairbanks area. So human footprint as far as subsistence goes, there's quite a number of game management units that are within our study area, large area. And this is kind of looking at game management units with access. I was able to talk with the people in the Fairbanks North Star Borough, and they are going to share with me their population model. What they did with their human growth population model is they kind of focused on the area around Fairbanks that actually has people. The North Star Borough is quite huge, and a lot of it just doesn't have people. So they have about 80 polygon units, and within those polygon units, they calculated like traffic intensity and human intensity, and modeled it out to, I believe, 2035. So they're going to share that information with us. As far as development of new roads in the Fairbanks area, they didn't really have any major roads that they put in their simulations. It was more connecting existing routes in the area. So as far as like modeling subsistence with access, other than the previous slide with the road to Umiad, roads to Nome, in the Fairbanks North Star Road didn't sound like there would be a whole bunch of surprise new roads in the future. So what I did is I used the harvest lookup data from ADF&G, and I calculated kind of the number of caribou hunters within the different game management units. This is the number going in 2013, but the database goes back to 87. And this is the same thing, looking at the number of moose hunters. I figured that we could use this to kind of look at, another intensity, use of the land. And you could kind of look at the trends over time and maybe use some type of linear regression to kind of predict maybe how many hunters are going to be in there, and maybe try and update that with the human population growth in Alaska. I think some of my research has shown that maybe around 7% of the residents in Alaska are hunters. But of course that varies, at least moose hunters, but that varies widely whether you're in a rural area or an urban area. And, this kind of looks at the change in moose hunters, so that idea of trying to, use time steps to look at what's happening on the land. You can see the green is areas where you kind of, you had a growth in moose hunters, and the other areas are a loss, which I think this data is kind of funky because something happened like before 1990. Suddenly there was a lot more moose hunters before 1990, so I would feel more safe just using data from 1990 on. That's typically what I do when I use fish and game data, because it does go back to 1977. But game management units were so much different back then. Yeah. So the sport fish data. Cleanup is needed. Actually, I got done with that cleanup. I met with the lady down at Fish and Game who manages this, and we kind of figured out, why some of these dots here are coded the wrong color. So we're going to get harvest information, something like this, for each of those drainages, kind of the number of fish that were kept, the number kind of that were released by each of those drainages. And with these numbers, I thought maybe you could put like a 1 mile or 5 mile buffer around these river drainages, and that could kind of be a type of intensity use. Because with the landscape integrity map that Jamie does, a lot of it you need spatial inputs. In a text, I can use the text to describe kind of what's going on and connect this to the communities and give context to it. But as far as trying to incorporate the human stuff into the actual landscape integrity model.
Yeah.
And then for subsistence harvest, another source of data is the CSIS database. This is an example of looking at the total average subsistence harvest. I added up moose, caribou, sheep, salmon, whitefish, and pike. And then I was wondering about this subsistence gap analysis. This shows an example from Braun. He did this for the communities in the Ambler area, kind of trying to identify which communities are lacking harvest data in the subsistence household surveys. I thought maybe, we could do the same. Or I noticed that for the lower Yukon, there was an access database that was built where you could query by CE, by community, and other things to try and figure out which subsistence technical papers are available. So I wouldn't want to do both. It would be doing one or the other. I don't know if people have a preference for either, but if you're curious, I can pull up the access subsistence database to show you what that looks like. And here's what the harvest lookup data base looks like. This is available online.
Grape sheet thrush. Isn't that kind of a rare thrush too?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it would be good eating either.
But I believe I pulled these from the Central Yukon document, because I was trying to figure out what are the subsistence fish species we should go after. So golden eagle. And this I also, pulled up from the kind of the methods document for this REA, the process model for the analysis of the human footprint. And I didn't want to show every single map that I have, of the data, but we do have airport routes, we do have train routes, trails. That would be kind of like the Iditarod Trail. So I do have a lot of this data. So I'm going to go to this one. This is an example of how to answer kind of one of the subsistence management questions. This is using the harvest lookup data. So it's kind of combining the harvest lookup data, looking at the management regulations to kind of figure out, okay, there was a huge change in hunters or harvest in this area. What was it due to? Was there suddenly antler restrictions put in, or were cow hunts suddenly liberalized? So trying to put context to what's going on with those numbers. Turn it into spatial data, combining it with the game management units. And the one problem with this database is you don't know who it is. You just have numbers. You could look at the hunt numbers and determine, there's tier hunts. Tier 2 hunts are usually for subsistence users, so those have to be Alaska residents. You could try to maybe tease out those hunts and see if there's non-resident only hunts and then residents, but I'm not so confident that you could break out resident, non-residents, and tier, which would be rural Alaskans. But if you can't, you can still get an idea of how many people are hunting in a specific area. And if we can tease it out to where people live, you could combine that, like I mentioned, with like the human population projected. Look at potential hunters, gas price projections, kind of content, and then try and figure out what your future harvest is. And this is an example with the CSIS database. This would be subsistence harvest only, and with those we know which community members are doing the harvest, so you could more easily unite the population growth trends or population changes with actual hunters. So it's the same basic idea, fine scale information. And then this is kind of a fuel cost paper that Todd Brinkman published in 2014, kind of looking at how changes in fuel prices affect subsistence harvest. And yeah, those communities are basically in our study area. So. As far as comparing the landscape disturbances, anthropogenic, the last 20, 50 years, kind of on the bottom there I have the river drainage. You combine that with the historic population, kind of come up with the human density for 20 and 50 years. All of these layers, some are going to be polygons, some are just going to be straight lines. I was able to obtain the forest timber harvest database. And with that, we have, to represent timber, I'm going to have the Tanana Valley State Forest. That's an area that was mostly open to harvest. And then I have sales for lots. And then there's a trail access layer that goes with the Forest Service data.
That just goes back 5 years, or how far does that go back?
The timber sales are 5 years, I think, forward. Yeah. I need to, when I'm up in Fairbanks, meet again with the North Star Bureau. They have a lot of GIS data, and they have historic images of Fairbanks, so we could probably use those to go back and look at the anthropogenic input in the past. And then as far as trying to get some of the mining roads, like around Fort Knox and Usabelli and Pogo, I think I need to stop by DNR again when I'm up there. Talked to a lady that I was introduced to a few weeks ago. So we already saw that one. But so the anthropogenic data sets, community boundaries, kind of population size, native-owned lands. Most of the, I thought about looking at the different corporations, but basically Doyon makes up most of our communities. Some of them you have NANA. And most of the stuff I already have. The abandoned mines layer, the lady is in Anchorage here, but she's on vacation right now, so she's on my list of people to contact. And the sport fish data, I've seen it, but it's still being compiled. So eventually I'll get that. But I think that's all. Thanks.
You're fast.
Yeah.
So I know maybe some folks joined us later in the conversation, but Jen ran through a bunch of slides and asked quite a few questions going through how to approach different analyses, and she's madly looking, I think, for some updated slides. But I'm just curious if anybody, kind of first impressions or feedback for Jen, thinks that maybe we've missed or misinterpreted at this point. Moving forward, I know she's done a good job at doing outreach with quite a few folks, but it'd be great to get feedback from those on the phone.
Yeah, because I don't know what happened to my presentation. This is an example of kind of the density for placer mining permits and that RS2477 trails that I was looking at. And yeah, some of these trails, even in the North Scarborough area, aren't on that other transportation layer that we use. So that's an example of that data set. The forestry, I'm sorry I have to do it this way, but forestry, here's an example of kind of timber sales, 5-year, I think that's over-the-counter reoffer sales, and then the Tanana Valley State Forest, the forest activity.
Timber sales are very small.
Mm-hmm.
Can't see them.
Yeah. And here's kind of the updated and operating renewable energy locations. I was able kind of to, talk to Justin is the person who gave me this database and figure out what was the difference between one and before, their map and their publication, and this one.
And what's the difference between hydro and ocean river?
I would have to look into definitions, I'm not sure. There's one ocean river right here. This is maybe Niana, is that? Yeah. Yep. So, an example of that. Section dredging permits was another mining activity.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, this one has the RS2477, and you can kind of see, like, here's an example of where that trail extends a little bit longer. And, a lot of these trails are important because, you can use them to access hunting areas and mining areas. And talking to the mining people, miners typically tend to go back to the same areas that have been mined. So looking at change over the years is probably going to be very, very minimal. But, it takes a lot to get that equipment in there and move it all around and stuff like that. There was one other thing that I did want to show you, this recreational use, because since I have maybe some people that might be able to help me. Let's see. Backcountry overnight. Like, here's an example of backcountry overnight for the national parks. The Fish and Wildlife Service, I've contacted them to see if they have any user information, but they haven't gotten back to me. But here's an example of a number of people going back to 1982 that have backcountry overnight permits for each of these national parks. And so my next step would be to, figure out what's going on with Yukon Charlie, what caused this initial spike, a plateau, suddenly big increases. A lot of the area burned in 2004.
We're just surprised at the magnitude on the y-axis there.
Yeah, well, I had National Park Service pull the numbers for me, and that's what they gave me. So, this was kind of recreational statistics that I pulled. I don't know, the parks have become popular lately or better records. Just basically recreational visitors. So, and if people don't think, because, you know, the parks are so big, if people don't think just using this number and, you know, dividing it by the area of the park is appropriate, we could, you know, use the rivers and trails layer and buffer that and kind of maybe confine the people and impact area to that location.
Yeah. You can just attribute sort of an intensity factor on the actual linear features. Put that into the landscape condition model.
Okay. I think those are basically the ones that were left out of my lovely redone presentation, which is weird. So, oh, there's closed mine permits. That's the other. Closed mine. So, but I mean, it's very small numbers. Most of them are placer mines. That's the highest.
Like closed since when?
I need to contact like DDGS to look into
it'd be interesting the temporal scale on those.
Mhm.
Are they all recent or are these like 40 years ago? Or?
And these images give a much different picture than that ADFR thing with dots all over the place, you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any questions from folks on the phone?
Yeah, Jen, this is Erin Julianis up in Fairbanks. I think I have two things. One's about the, you know, it looks like for the trails you just used the RS2477 layer, is that right?
Yeah, let's see. For the linear features, this, you know, includes historic trails. I mean, yeah, you have that. You have other trail routes. The forestry layer also had forestry roads to it.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it's more than just the RS247. Yeah, I was going to say, because, you know, a lot of our, you know, like placer mining stuff on up the Dalton Highway is, you know, a lot of times it's accessed, you know, I mean, often by those RS2477s, but also like pipeline access roads and, you know, there's a number of different, I don't know, trail networks, I guess, that are being used. But, I mean, this is the kind of the data layer that I often, you know, pull up and use in ArcMap, but.
Where would like a person get pipeline trail routes? I mean, I have the pipeline itself, but
right.
The trails for that?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, good. You're on, Cindy. Go.
Well, I was just going to say, I think I sent that layer to Jamie. What's 3 layers that you might have to put together, but I think that would be a really good representation up and down the Dalton. One is pipeline and material access roads off the Dalton. Yeah. One is mining trails to mining claims, and I can't remember what the third one was, Jamie, but if that hasn't hit your inbox, let me know.
Okay, yeah, I know I did see it, but I have not. All right, I saw it come through, but I haven't done so. Yeah, thanks. We'll take a look at those.
The other thing to caution about some of these RS2477s is some of them do not actually exist on the ground, and I've never seen a data set where they've pulled out which ones do and which ones don't. So there might be some trails that were used 100 years ago but have grown over so much that you can't even see it on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a common problem. You know, you could make a rule like with fire. If trails have been hit by fire, you know, within the last 10 years, they're nixed and gone. But I'm not really sure if going through that would be worth it.
We do have the bird parameters. That would be easy to take those out, but I don't know if that's really good.
Yeah, that seems like a small branch of what would kind of cause
it to be picking and choosing, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you could take an area where you maybe know that trails no longer exist and maybe see what it looks like on Google Earth and, you know, see if on Google Earth they look like they exist and they're but if they look like they no longer exist, you can kind of update it just by taking a quick look at a Google Earth layer and saying, oh, yeah, obviously this one doesn't work.
Yeah, it just take a long time. Yeah. Potentially go through all that fragments. But
I guess that's one thing that's, you know, bedeviled us that I've heard through the project is having an accurate trail layer, and okay, you know, when do we want to put the time in to actually make a better layer?
Yeah, like Jen mentioned, she was trying to kind of digitize trails around communities, hand digitize them, and it's really time consuming, and it's such a small footprint, you know, compared to the region as a whole. Might not be the best use of our time, but if the RS2477 roads really kind of make a big impact on the landscape condition model, maybe that would be something to. Do you have a sense, Cindy, of how like proportionally how many of those would be not, you know, vegetated or no longer?
I don't actually. It's just kind of a disclaimer that we put on all of our planning maps that, you know, RS2477s aren't known to be on the ground condition, and maybe that's all you can say as well. I've talked to Jamie about our GTLF layer. I can look at that and see if any of the trails coming out of the communities got captured in that as well.
Yeah, that'd be
pull
great.
them out.
Yeah. Even if you just did a quick buffer around the communities to see what's in that data set, that'd be great.
I don't think Erin got to her second point, but I have something else when she's done as well.
Mine was a subsistence thing, so I don't know if you have a trails thing, you can go ahead and deal with that.
It's not a trails thing. You go.
Okay. So the subsistence, I'm trying to keep track of all of my databases. So Jen, you used WinfoNet state data for that?
Yes. However, I do know that, like with the moose data, I know it occurs on smaller drainages, kind of called UCUs. They're kind of like data. And with that data, you do have the hunter puts down where they live. So, you know, potentially, if I could get that data from Fish and Game, you could look up, you know, who is hunting where, and better meld that with population trajectories. I was going to talk with Sue more about doing that.
Yeah. You know, I wonder if, I mean, I don't know if this is mine to offer, but have you talked to the OSM guys at all about using the federal subsistence database data?
No.
Yeah, because that'd be a really good resource, but like I said, it's not mine to, I don't know how they, you know, you'd have to talk to them, but, you know, they have reporting under the, or they have harvest reports for all of the, you know, the federal registration hunts, and that would probably, you know, that'd be a really good resource, I would think. I know that, you know, subsistence hunters are not required to report caribou harvest north of the Yukon River, so that's always been kind of a data gap, you know, for me, like how many caribou, you know, are being harvested north of the Yukon. But yeah, I can get you in touch with one of the database guys over there, if that would be helpful.
That would be very helpful.
Okay.
And that, you know, the caribou north of the Yukon, that's kind of where the CSIS database comes in to try and fill in missing data. Although, I mean, the two data sets aren't equal; they kind of represent different things. But also, I talked with Stephanie Martin, who works on this project, about getting spatial subsistence household survey data, and she did not get any for this area. So it would be kind of myself trying to contact the Tanana Chiefs Conference. They might have some. Contact maybe some of the workers up at UAF. They might have some data, but also going to the Division of Subsistence here and seeing what spatial layers they have to calculate subsistence use intensity.
Yeah. And I know, you know, a couple months ago, Cindy and I kind of worked through this. You know, you had your table with all of the different, you know, citations for different subsistence, you know, data layer stuff for subsistence. And we kind of went through the same thing where, you know, we've got this planning area for this big land management plan that we're doing. And we were trying to figure out, like, you know, what communities we have subsistence data for and what we don't. And Cindy, we could probably pass that along to them too, if that would be
If nothing else, it'll save time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, but it looks like they had a lot of it. You know, I just kind of picked out a lot of their sources that were similar, but it might be good just to cross check.
That reminds me, the Access database that I was talking about. The data filter, enable content, data viewer. This is the Access database that was built for the Lower Yukon area.
Okay.
So we'll be building something like this versus something like the data gap analysis that I showed in the presentation. I don't know if there's a preference for either or too much work, neither.
This is what we did for YKL.
Yeah, where we specifically did the keyword linkage to all the CEs and a synthesis. This is one of the delivered products to YKL. So if this is still of use, this kind of approach,
But maybe if you've already done this exercise, and I don't know, maybe it's not needed, or?
Right.
Well, I'm not done with the gap analysis. I just, that was my effort after probably maybe 4 hours.
I was just thinking it sounds like maybe they've been working on it.
Yeah, BLM's been kind of doing this similar type of effort.
Okay.
Maybe the gap analysis would be more appropriate.
What do you guys think, Cindy and Aaron, about us pursuing this further, or do you think you kind of did justice to this already?
I think this is probably more comprehensive than we did. Do you agree, Cindy? I mean, go ahead.
Well, I don't know. The spatial component is always what I'm after. So
right.
I don't know how you and Jen use an Access database to pull up different sources. I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah. I think tentatively, I think it'd be a worthwhile effort. I mean, I don't know how, what the time commitment is for this, but yeah, I'm not too afraid of Access.
Yeah, with something like this, I would probably add on there like a column that says spatial data available, yes or no.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And you could put on there harvest data. Spatial data and harvest data are basically the two that I think are important.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you should definitely pass along what you've worked on, so it would help build the database.
Could I just touch on that UCU concept for subsistence that came up a little earlier?
Sure.
So Jen and I were looking at sheep and UCUs and where people are reporting harvest, and I talked to Becky Strout with ADF&G down in Anchorage, and she really was very uncomfortable with that, and I don't know if you'll get the same reaction from Sue, but just because of the way that those units are reported, and if you know all of this already, I won't repeat it and belabor the point, but that might kind of be a pretty quick dead end.
Let's see.
Just because when people report by UCU, if they don't know which UCU they're in, it goes into the minor code, and so you aren't capturing all the harvest at the most detailed level, without trying to kind of incorporate locations that were reported at more general levels. I don't know, Becky said that she wouldn't report it at anything less than a GMU level. And the GMUs are pretty big. I don't know if maybe
she didn't say subunit?
Pardon?
She didn't say subunit? I would think that the subunit would be the GMU subunit.
And I guess that doesn't directly equate to the minor units.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of bizarre. Yeah, it's not even a direct, like the GMU is the biggest, then the minor's the smallest, and then the UCU is the very smallest.
Right.
The minor can actually sometimes be bigger than the GMU, so it just gets very convoluted very fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can talk to them about that, but definitely, like, you know, when something, this is an example of a map that's coded to the UCUs, and you can see the little tiny drainages, but if they aren't coded to a UCU that's actually in the spatial database, that data is lost. And you can look at the number of hunters that drop out when you try to convert it to spatial at the various levels. But yeah, I agree. When it comes to anything other than moose, I think it kind of gets pretty hairy. So I would just default to what Fish and Game feels comfortable with, because it is their data.
Sounds good.
Okay, then that's it.
I had one other thing. It's kind of related back to the mining. Your abandoned mines, and I'm guessing whatever you get from DNR or whoever you're talking to for abandoned mines will cover the area a lot better, but we do have a data set that we kind of created on the cuff. Just some folks before they retired have the historic abandoned mining claims in the Steese and the White Mountains, and we have them sketched out, but we only have it in the Steese and the White Mountains because there was only one person in our office who thought to track that. So it might not be worth anything. I could send it to you guys. Maybe it'd be a cross-check of whatever abandoned mine data set you're getting from DNR or whoever else you're getting it from. These would have been historic mining claims closed when Anilka passed. You know, they created the Steese and the Whites, and then mining was closed in those areas. So from, 1980s and older.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Certainly be used to help clean up the ARDS.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody else on the phone have any questions or comments for Jen?
Thank you, Jen. Good job.
Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. That's great. Well, thank you all for joining us, and hopefully you'll join us this afternoon. I'm trying to think of when the next one is. Sorry, I don't have my calendar out with me. But
11.
Is that 11? Okay, great. Thank you.
Remember who it is.
Wildlife.
It's wildlife.
Yeah.
Animals, and then
Still fine filters, and then trust record filters are at 1. And then invasive and insect disease at 3.
All right. Thanks. I'm going to go ahead and...
What?
I guess I'm going to go ahead and stop our meeting, but thank you for joining us.
Fish harvest. I'm kind of told that there was very few commercial fish harvests in the interior.
Well, at the